After Mitchell Cook revealed Kevin's full name to everyone, all of the wealthy guests were stunned. Aside from being the powerful CEO of the Williams Company, rumors had spread over the past few days about his ruthless reputation, not just eliminating the Butler and Blair families, but also doing the same to the Hayes family in Detroit. When none of the guests stood up after Mitchell Cook called everyone out for insulting Kevin earlier, he vowed to review the surveillance footage and urged the guilty parties to leave Chicago within 24 hours or have their families wiped out. Upon hearing Mitchell Cook's ominous words, the wealthy guests lost their appetites and could no longer eat or drink what they'd ordered. Despite being important and wealthy people themselves, all of the resources they had were inherited from their families and had been slowly built over decades of hard work by their parents and grandparents. Ever since Kevin had started using the Williams Company to auction off his power pills, the public image of the company had completely changed, and their status had skyrocketed. And although the combined wealth of everyone in the room added up to an astonishing figure, it was still far from enough to challenge the Williams Company. After leaving Mitchell Cook in charge of everything that was happening on the first floor, Kevin turned a deaf ear to all the commotion and went straight to the 17th floor. The moment he stepped out of the elevator, he was immediately met with another set of cold stares. However, in order to prevent any similar incidents from happening, Rachel was already waiting outside the elevator door as soon as she received Kevin's call. "Boss, you're finally back." Rachel greeted him with a smile and let out a heavy sigh as if she'd been freed from a heavy burden. "How's Lily doing?" Kevin asked her with some concern. "Her condition is still stable, but she was a little sad when she heard that the Jones family was destroyed." Rachel hesitated for a moment before continuing. "But boss, you have to be careful when you go inside. Your mother-in-law's mood is extremely sour and unhinged right now. She kept saying that she wanted Lily to divorce you." Rachel added, "Luckily, Spencer didn't hear what she said. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to stop the people of Radiance." When Kevin heard her, he couldn't help but laugh a little. He already expected this kind of reaction. Dorothy had just suffered at the hands of the top 9 schools. If she didn't make a fuss and get mad at him for it, it would have been too out of character for her. As he and Rachel walked to the room, they could hear voices coming from the other side of the door.
"Lily, I still can't believe that Rachel is now such a big executive. In the past, I only heard about the news, but this is the first time I've seen it with my own eyes,"
Dorothy remarked.
"Listen to me. You must build a good relationship with Rachel and ask her to help you find a good man to marry. Given our situation, you'll need to have at least a few $100 million in your hands."
When she heard this, Rachel's legs felt weak. She anxiously looked at Kevin to see his reaction. When she saw that he wasn't angry at all, she reflexively wiped the cold sweat from her forehead. However, Dorothy wasn't done speaking yet.
"Lily, you really have to listen to your mother. Even though Kevin, that piece of trash, has turned his life around to become the CEO of the Williams Company, what's the use of that if we can't even benefit from it? And what has he given us in return?"
Dorothy continued.
"At the end of the day, Kevin is just an ingrate who we aren't really familiar with. And without our knowledge, he's offended so many people. What do you think anybody would do if something bad happened to either of us? Although, if Kevin is dead, we can't be implicated with all the enemies he's left behind. Besides, you're still young, and there are many men out there who would like to marry you."
Dorothy tried desperately to convince her daughter. Listening to Dorothy's nagging, Phoebe took a deep breath and irritably rubbed her temples. She really didn't understand what Dorothy was thinking. How come she wasn't satisfied with having a son-in-law like Kevin?
"Mom, please stop. No matter what you say, I'll never divorce Kevin. I've decided to stay with him and only him for the rest of my life,"
Lily answered firmly.
"Are you stupid? So what if Kevin is rich? Nowadays there are many rich men. Furthermore, Rachel's business is doing really well now. Can't you just ask her to let you manage part of it?
Dorothy said with some annoyance. Kevin deliberately coughed as he slowly pushed the door open and walked in. "We don't need anything. You can get out now." Dorothy was in a bad mood. Without seeing who it was, she thought it was the hotel staff checking in on them. At the same time, when they saw who had just come in the room, Lily, who was sitting on the bed, was stunned, while Phoebe immediately stood up from her chair. "What's the matter with the two of you? Who is it?" Dorothy turned her head to look and finally saw why they both had reacted like that. "Kevin? You piece of trash! You finally resurfaced? How dare you show yourself now? It would have been much better if you had died." "Kevin!" Without waiting for Kevin to answer Dorothy's insults, Phoebe's eyes instantly turned red and she immediately threw herself into his arms. Dorothy and Lily were confused by this. They thought to themselves, "What's wrong with Phoebe? Why did she get so excited when she saw Kevin?" "All right, let's find a quiet place to have a good chat later." Kevin gently pushed Phoebe away from his arms and greeted the two people beside him with a smile. "Mom, Lily, I'm back." Although Lily didn't say anything, tears couldn't help but fall from her eyes. However, this wasn't the case with Dorothy, whose violent temper immediately erupted like a volcano. "You still have the nerve to come back after going missing for all this time? Do you know how I was harmed because of you? Do you understand how much suffering I had to endure for my useless son-in-law's absence?" Dorothy took several deep breaths as she fumed in anger. "I already used to think that you were trash, but I didn't realize that you would cause so much trouble for us. You have to fix this problem, Kevin. Go show yourself to those old men and give them what they need. After that, ask them to give me the money they promised me. Then you and Lily can get a divorce and we'll never have to see each other again." Dorothy still remembered all the verbal threats she received from the top 9 schools. Kevin scratched his head and shrugged his shoulders. "Mom, you can't blame me for this, can you? It was you who promised to give those people all those things without checking with me first." "Are you really blaming me for trying to help you out?" Dorothy's eyes widened and her voice instantly became several times louder. "I just figured that since you weren't making money all these years, I wanted to use the opportunity you had to—" "Mom, you really don't need to be so considerate of me," Kevin interrupted her. Dorothy fell silent for a few seconds, but soon the whole room was filled with her roars. "Don't think that you're very impressive just because you now have the Williams Company. That doesn't erase the fact that for the past few years you were just a useless son-in-law who lived in my house to eat and drink for free." Dorothy pointed at Kevin and shouted, "Mark my words here today. You and Lily are going to divorce. There's no room for negotiation on this matter." Dorothy continued, "Now that that's settled, I don't want to see your face ever again. So get out of here immediately, you piece of trash." Kevin took a deep breath. Despite all of Dorothy's harsh words, there was still no trace of annoyance on his face. "Didn't you hear me? I told you to get out of here." Dorothy slightly raised her chin. "Don't think that you can stay here as long as you wish. You may be the CEO of the Williams Company, but this is Rachel's Salix Sleep Hotel. It's not a place where you can impose your will." Then Dorothy turned to Rachel. "Rachel, listen to your Aunt Dorothy. Find someone to kick him out for me. Letting this piece of trash enter your hotel like this will just tarnish your reputation." Hearing this, Rachel almost knelt down to Kevin as she tried to reason with Dorothy. "Auntie, please don't say that." No one could imagine how much pressure Rachel was currently under. Unlike Kevin, she had never had anyone in her life admire her. Now Dorothy was definitely one of them. She was touched by this, but at the same time, how could Dorothy dare to say those things in front of Kevin? "Rachel, I know that it's not easy for you to do on account of Lily, but you also don't need to worry about the feelings of my good-for-nothing son-in-law. After all, you're also one of the top bosses in Chicago. And the CEO of the Williams Company can't do anything about it since this is your hotel," Dorothy advised her earnestly. "Rachel, I'm tired, and I don't want to see this useless trash of space ever again. So please do me a favor and kick him out of the hotel." "Aunt Dorothy, you really shouldn't be saying those things. Kevin, Mr. Williams, I would never dare to fight with him." Rachel was about to cry. Dorothy's impression of Rachel was shattered in an instant. It was precisely because she was working under Kevin that Rachel knew how powerful he really was. Because of this, she was afraid that Kevin would take everything away from her if Dorothy continued to try and pit the two of them against each other. "What exactly is going on with you, Rachel? Don't tell me that my useless son-in-law, a mere CEO of another company, actually holds any influence over you." Dorothy finally realized that the matter wasn't really as simple as she'd thought. While Kevin and Lily were out shopping, a pink Bugatti suddenly caught her eye. But when they entered the car dealership to inquire, the salesperson immediately judged Kevin by his poor clothes and dismissed them as mere window shoppers. When he tried to make them leave, Lily angrily defended both Kevin and herself. This commotion drew the attention of the people around them, including Emma Larson, Lily's old college friend who used to live in her dorm. Emma, who was visiting the dealership with her husband, was excited to catch up with Lily. "I didn't expect to see you here. The last time I saw you, your last name was still Sanders. How's married life treating you?" Lily asked her in surprise. "Oh, my life is just so-so. My husband is just a manager who works for the Williams Company here in Chicago." Emma Larson deliberately emphasized her tone when she mentioned the Williams Company. She raised her chin a little and looked at Lily. "How about your husband?" Hearing this, the other people around them looked in surprise at the man who was standing next to Emma. Ever since the Williams Company became known for offering power pills, its influence had significantly risen in the entire Midwest. Because of this, various companies across the country were scrambling to get in touch with the company, hoping to set up a partnership in exchange for some of the highly coveted pills. As a result, this also led to the rapid expansion of the Williams Company portfolio across multiple industries. It was no longer just a media company. The man who was with Emma saw Lily and had a hard time looking away. Even though he was married, his eyes were drawn to her face and her figure. Just as Lily was about to answer Emma's question, the man reached out his hand gracefully. "I'm Timothy Larson. I wonder if this beauty would like to exchange phone numbers?" Before Lily could react, Kevin had already stepped in to shake the man's hand. "Nice to meet you. I'm flattered, but I'm not the type of guy to give away my number so easily when I just met someone." "Who are you?" A little hint of annoyance appeared in Timothy Larson's eyes. He looked at Kevin's clothes and couldn't help but show some disgust on his face. "I'm Lily's husband," Kevin replied with a smile. "Based on what your wife has shared with us, you must be in the upper management of the Williams Company. Please keep up the great work." "At least you have some insight. But if you want to make up for rudely interrupting me, you need to show me a little more sincerity." Timothy started leering at Lily again. By now, Lily was lowering her head. She felt that Kevin had really changed a lot compared to the way he used to be. Now that she knew his true identity as the CEO of the Williams Company, she could tell that he was only playing along and waiting for the right moment to make his move. "Hubby, didn't you say that you would buy a car for me today? Let's not waste time being petty." Emma Larson deliberately tried to sound as cute as possible. She noticed her husband eyeing Lily, and she wasn't going to let her steal him away. "Can't I have some fun? I don't have anything to do in the afternoon anyway, so we can take our time here." Timothy Larson answered her playfully. "Lily, are you and your husband here to buy a car? If I'm not mistaken, it seemed that you were interested in getting one as I saw you talking to the staff just a moment ago. Did you think the price was too high?" Emma was clearly sizing her up. She immediately added, "Back in school, you were the most beautiful woman on campus. Do you still remember all those rich guys chasing after you? With countless options left and right, I didn't expect you to marry such a poor person. You must have lowered your standards a little since then." Timothy Larson felt that it was time to show his superiority. He straightened up his tie and said, "I'm actually friends with the manager of this dealership. Since the two of you are former classmates, I'll introduce you guys when I see him. It won't be a problem for me to get a discount for you and your husband." "Even with the discount, they won't be able to afford it," the salesperson from earlier suddenly scoffed. "Do you know which car they were interested in?" The salesperson then pointed at the pink Bugatti. The exterior design of the car was really sleek and sophisticated. It was very suitable for an elegant young woman. "Wow, hubby, that car is so beautiful. Can you buy it for me, please?" Emma Larson's eyes immediately grew wide when she saw it. "Anything for my lovely wife. If you really like that car, then I'll buy it for you. How much is it anyway?" Timothy Larson looked at Kevin proudly as if to show him that there was a huge gap between the two of them. "You would do that for me, hubby? I love you so much." Emma kissed his cheek in delight. Then she turned around to Lily and asked, "Lily, I'm really sorry. Although you took a liking to it first, your husband probably can't afford it anyway, isn't that so? Since my husband works for the Williams Company, he's not short on cash at all." Emma was really happy about this chance to show Lily up. Back when they were in college, she used to be secretly jealous of Lily. But despite being a beautiful woman herself, she didn't have Lily's status with the Jones family behind her. So she ultimately couldn't hold a candle to her. In the past, Emma thought that she'd never be able to surpass Lily in her entire life. Then again, who would have thought that Lily, who had caught the eyes of many wealthy suitors, would actually end up marrying such a poor husband? Now that Emma had a chance to buy the car that her former rival couldn't afford for herself, this was finally her chance to hold her head high. And she wasn't going to let go of the opportunity to stick it to her rival in front of everyone. "That car is worth $19 million. If you really want to buy it, just give us your card so I can swipe it immediately." The salesperson wasn't very excited at all. He'd already offered this car to many wealthy buyers, but none of them were willing to shell out the money once they found out the price. Similarly, upon hearing the cost of the Bugatti, the smile on Timothy Larson's face instantly froze. Although the Williams Company gave him a very good salary of $10 million per year, this car was worth nearly 2 years of his annual pay. "Do you want it or not? If you can't afford it, then hurry up and leave. Don't waste any more of our time," the salesperson urged impatiently. "What do you mean? How can you be so sure that I can't afford it? Is that how you do business around here? Why do you have to be so rude to your customers? No wonder this place isn't getting any buyers. Let me speak to your manager. I'm sure my friend will fire you this instant." Timothy felt that he had to say something to divert the topic and find an excuse not to buy the car. "I can tell that you clearly can't afford it and you're just stalling to find a good excuse and avoid humiliating yourself." The salesperson's temper immediately flared up. "Don't be so arrogant. You may be friends with the manager, but I'm not afraid to tell you that this dealership is owned by Dominic Archer. If you want to cause a scene, you'd better prepare yourself to face him." Timothy Larson's expression changed instantly when he heard the man mention Dominic Archer's name. A bead of sweat suddenly trickled down his forehead. "If you really plan to buy the car, then I won't say anything more to you. That car is worth more than $19 million, and after the discount, it'll be $19 million even. Do you want to pay by card or cash?" The salesperson coldly sneered at Timothy. We don't want it anymore." Timothy didn't have the courage to provoke Dominic Archer's people. "You don't want it anymore? You wasted so much of my time. Mr. Archer doesn't like fickle people, so I cannot accept no for an answer." The salesperson then threatened him. "Even if you don't want the car, you have no choice now but to buy it. Your only choice is whether to pay by card or cash." Emma realized that something wasn't right and thought of something quickly. "Didn't they take a fancy to this car first?" She pointed at Kevin and Lily as she spoke. When you look at the clothes this man is wearing, you obviously can tell that they can't afford this car. But you guys are different. Since your husband works for the Williams Company, he must be pretty well off." The salesperson's words sounded very familiar. Although the surrounding onlookers also felt that the salesperson was being unfair and unreasonable by forcing Timothy to buy the car, at the moment, no one dared to speak up. Ever since the Steele family had been attacked, Dominic Archer's reputation and power had grown so much in Chicago that they were all intimidated by the mention of his name alone. "But we really can't afford it." Timothy was so embarrassed he wanted to cry. The truth was that the Williams Company had just expanded into a new branch, and because he just entered his position not long ago, he hadn't even gotten his first paycheck yet. "It's easy to just say that you're not able to afford it. If you keep insisting that that's the case, I'll have no choice but to tell Mr. Archer about this and let him have a talk with you himself," the salesperson said with a cruel smile on his face. Kevin couldn't help but laugh when he heard this. "What are you laughing at? Did you really think that I'd let you off the hook? Let me tell you something. Although you're poor, that still doesn't give you a good excuse to get out of this situation. Because you wasted my time, you have to buy a car worth more than $1 million from our dealership, which cost at least $3 million to operate. If you don't have the money, then I'll gladly have your legs broken." The salesperson snorted and arrogantly lifted his chin. Many people in the showroom gasped when they heard this. This man was just a mere salesperson. How could he be so ruthlessly demanding? Wasn't he being a bit too overbearing? Unhappy about Kevin's return, his mother-in-law, Dorothy, blamed him for what had happened to her and demanded that he divorce Lily. Thinking that Rachel was the owner of the Salix Leaf Hotel, Dorothy then asked her to kick Kevin out. Afraid of what Kevin might do to her, Rachel explained that she would never dare to do anything against him. Upon hearing this, Dorothy began to realize that there was more to Rachel's reaction and wondered if Kevin also held some influence over her. At the same time, Lily's heart was also filled with doubt. For some time now, Kevin's mysterious personal matters and elusive whereabouts had already subverted her understanding of who he was. It wasn't just the attitude of the major schools towards him, such as when the Healing Arts School had completely cut off their relationship with the union after the martial arts competition. Now he was even able to command thousands of people from the Radiants to come to Chicago just to save her. But beyond the great powers, what surprised her the most was that Kevin seemed to have established a connection with the federal government. She clearly remembered that the person who rescued her and Phoebe had been sent by Kevin as well. What exactly happened to him? Lily thought in puzzlement. It seemed that Kevin was far different from the person she knew when they first got married years ago. Rachel looked at Kevin and saw that he still hadn't responded to Dorothy's tirade. Taking a deep breath, she braced herself and explained, "Aunt Dorothy, I won't hide it from you. Actually, the real boss behind me is Mr. Williams. He's the one who helped me attain my current position as vice president. The entire Salix Leaf Hotel is owned by him." When she finished speaking, the room fell into silence once again. Both Phoebe and Lily looked at Kevin in disbelief. They were so shocked that their eyes were wide open and their jaws had completely dropped. They were already surprised when they first found out that Kevin was the CEO of the Williams Company. But never in their wildest dreams would they have imagined that the Salix Leaf Hotel would be his as well. Recalling Mitchell Cook's previous attitude towards him, the two women suddenly had the same thought. Could it be that the Witzler Hotel is also Kevin's? It had to be said that a woman's intuition was usually very accurate, and now they both began to wonder what other properties and businesses could be his. Meanwhile, Dorothy looked at Kevin as if she'd seen a ghost. Her body began to tremble violently. "Mom, let me tell you something. As long as I'm her husband, no one in Chicago will dare to get close to Lily." Kevin smiled at her harmlessly. In Chicago, he certainly had the ability to control even its most powerful people with a wave of his hand. After all, the much-coveted power pill was like a golden signboard for the Williams Company, as everyone was willing to give him what he wanted just to get one. Moreover, Scott Whitney's promise to make him second in command of the Reaper Squad meant that he had the federal government to support him as well. You! Dorothy attempted to say something in response, but her voice was trembling so hard that she couldn't even get past the first word each time. Kevin sighed softly and walked over to Lily to hold her hand. I know I've given you a hard time over the past few days by not being here. Have you been suffering in St. Louis? Lily stared at Kevin with a complicated look. Suddenly she thought that she might not be worthy of him anymore. St. Louis is a good place. If you have time, I'll take you there to relax and have some fun for a little while, Kevin said softly. All right. Lily put her arms around Kevin's waist and gave him a tight hug as she slowly closed her eyes. Neither of them talked about what had happened in the past few days. All that mattered right now was that they were both safe from harm and finally together once again. After a night's rest, Dorothy went out early the next morning. Meanwhile, Kevin and Lily woke up with smiles on their faces and chatted happily and sweetly as they ate breakfast. Hubby, let's go shopping today, okay? Lily didn't even ask Kevin if he had other plans. Last night, she'd finally made a decision. No matter how big Kevin's career would get outside, no matter how powerful of a figure he would become in society, and no matter how many enemies he would make because of it, she didn't care as long as they were together. Given this, she knew that she had to help Kevin in some way. Without the physical strength to protect him like the Radiants or extensive resources to offer like Mitchell Cook, why not show Kevin support by trying her best to be a good wife to him when he returned home? What if she got along with him as much as possible? Lily wanted to show Kevin that she was worthy of him by being the one person who would stay by his side regardless of his status, and when no one else was looking. And even if this could only relieve some of the pressure off him, it was also good for Kevin to not have any worries in his heart. Kevin took a sip of orange juice and asked with a smile, All right then, which mall do you want to go shopping in today? Why don't we go and look for a house? Lily suddenly thought of this. Why do you want to buy a new house? Aren't you satisfied with your current apartment? Kevin asked, puzzled. He really didn't need a house right now. He still had his apartment in Corwin Tower, and his parents' unit at the Salix Leaf Complex could also be used as a place to live while they were out of town. I just want to move someplace else. I don't want those people to find me again so easily. Lily slightly lowered her head. Lily wanted to move because she discovered something. She seemed to have been causing too much trouble for Kevin. And now that her captors knew where she lived, she felt that her apartment was no longer safe. By moving to a new house, she figured that she could get a fresh start. This way, Kevin could come home to her any time while ensuring that she was in a safe place whenever he had to leave. Lily, you don't need to be afraid at all. Those people won't be able to hurt you as long as I'm around. Besides, no matter where you move to, they'll definitely always have ways to track you down. What are you going to do when that happens? You can't keep hiding forever, Kevin responded truthfully. Before she brought this up, he'd actually considered bringing Lily and Dorothy to the Radiance headquarters. However, that place was deep in the mountains and forests, and he was afraid that the two of them would never get used to living there. After hearing Kevin's reply, Lily didn't speak about the topic anymore. And after they finished eating breakfast, she held Kevin's hand as they left the Salix Leaf Hotel. Despite still feeling a bit troubled from earlier, it seemed like shopping was the perfect cure for everything. After just half an hour, the haze in Lily's heart was completely swept away. Hubby, that car is so beautiful. Lily saw a pink sports car in the showroom of a car dealership and fell in love with it. If you like it, then I'll buy it for you. Kevin held her hand confidently and quickly walked inside. Kevin pointed at the sports car and asked the salesperson, How much is the Bugatti? This salesperson was originally quite happy to have some prospective buyers, but when he saw Kevin wearing such shabby clothes, his smile immediately vanished. The salesman scolded him angrily. Don't bother me if you've got nothing better to do. We both know that this car is something you'd never be able to afford in your lifetime. It was Kevin's turn to be stunned. He wondered if the guy was having a bad day or something. Was there a problem with the way that he greeted him? "How can you talk down to my husband like that? He didn't even say anything that would offend you. What's so great about this car anyway?" Lily defended Kevin. She didn't want him to be looked down upon ever again. "There are just some questions that people like him shouldn't ask." The salesperson looked at Lily carefully from top to bottom. After working in the dealership for so long, he believed that he still had a good eye for telling a potential buyer from a mere window shopper. "Well, if you must know, this pink Bugatti is a limited edition car with only 5 models existing in the world, and its price is over $10 million. Can you afford it?" The salesperson looked condescendingly at Kevin again. "Look at the clothes you're wearing. You may have fooled this beautiful young woman for some unknown reason, but there are some things that someone like you just can't buy or even touch." Feeling that his time had been wasted, the salesperson was getting irritated by Kevin and Lily. "If there's nothing else, please leave quickly. You might discourage actual buyers from coming in." "Hey, why are you being so disrespectful to us? Who gave you the right to judge us like that? And so what if my husband prefers to wear simple clothes? Are you that insecure to call me a fool for marrying him?" Lily's temper instantly flared up and her voice unconsciously started to get a little louder. This commotion began to attract the attention of many people around them. Suddenly they heard someone say, "Lily?" A man and a woman slowly walked over to them. "Emma Larson, is that you?" Lily immediately recognized the person. They'd lived in the same dormitory back in college. "The one and only. I didn't expect to meet you here." Emma Larson, who was dressed beautifully in an elegant gown, exclaimed in surprise, "How have you been recently? I haven't heard from you in a long time. Is this your husband?" Facing her friend's continuous barrage of questions, Lily only replied softly, "I didn't expect to meet you here either." After emphatically rejecting the salesperson's offer to become one of Dominic Archer's men, Kevin told him to call his boss over and send reinforcements. This caused the other salespeople to surround Kevin as Lily walked up to him and held his arm. With that, Timothy Larson urged them to kill Kevin in exchange for a partnership between the Williams Company and Dominic Archer. Meanwhile, the salesperson who had been sent flying by Kevin earlier had just gotten off the phone. He then whispered something to the person next to him as Timothy angrily asked why nobody was making a move on Kevin. Before today, no one had ever made a move on Timothy in front of so many people, not to mention the fact that Kevin was just a useless man who lived off his wife's money. How could Timothy swallow his pride and not seek revenge? "Wait a moment. I should be the one settling the score with you after destroying one of our cars. We don't answer to you." The salesperson wasn't falling for Timothy's offer of a partnership. To be honest, Timothy was just a manager at the Williams Company. At the end of the day, he wasn't the final decision maker in the company, so his offer was worthless. More importantly, these were all Dominic Archer's men. Due to Dominic Archer's recent rapid expansion of power, many shops were in urgent need of manpower. If not for the lack of sufficient employees, these normally blade-wielding men wouldn't want to sell cars for a living. And after Timothy had damaged one of their cars, they would surely face Dominic Archer's wrath if nobody paid for it. "I just offered your boss a deal with the Williams Company. Do you know what that means, or are you stupid?" Timothy was getting impatient. He couldn't wait to make Kevin kneel down and apologize to him. "I don't care what kind of company you're from. Your offer won't work with us." The salesperson clenched his fists and said, "If you don't want to be beaten up too, then be quiet. Otherwise you'll find out why the flowers around here are so red." Timothy was immediately incensed by this, but in the end he chose not to say anything. After all, he was still afraid of getting beaten up by Dominic Archer's henchmen. Still, he couldn't help but feel extremely disappointed. What was going on today? Why was the Williams Company's reputation suddenly not helping him? The salesperson turned his attention to Kevin and sneered at him. "Kid, you still have time to think about how you're going to die." However, Kevin ignored him and just patted Lily's hand to comfort her. "Lily, I advise you to leave your husband as soon as possible. He's going to die today anyway, no matter what. And even if the owner of this dealership won't do anything to him, my husband surely won't let him off the hook." Emma looked at her harshly and said, "Perhaps you don't know how powerful my husband is. I'm not afraid to tell you that he's attained a high position that your husband will never be able to dream of in his lifetime. Since we're classmates, as long as you take my advice, I won't let my husband make things too difficult for you." Emma added, as if this might make Lily feel any better. Then Timothy glanced at his wife and nodded intentionally before he looked over at Lily again. Seeing her graceful figure and delicate face, his heart became restless again at the thought of stealing her away from Kevin once all this was over. Just then, everyone heard heavy footsteps coming from outside the door, and they couldn't help but look over to see who it was. Dominic Archer had just entered the store with 20 or so bodyguards. "Who the hell dared to hit one of my men?" Dominic Archer roared furiously. Many people's legs started to tremble and feel weak when they heard this. Some of them even turned pale and quickly lowered their heads to avoid any eye contact with him. Dominic Archer's reputation in Chicago was really terrifying. The mention of his name alone was enough to cause people's expressions to change drastically. And here he was, in the flesh. "Mr. Archer!" More than a dozen salespeople called out respectfully. The salesperson who'd called earlier walked up to him with a flattering smile on his face. "Boss, how did you get here so fast?" "I happened to be working nearby." Dominic Archer looked at the shoe print on the man's chest, and the surrounding crowd suddenly became uncomfortable. Anyone who harmed one of his men was essentially slapping Dominic in the face. Given this, Dominic Archer's purpose in coming to the car dealership was to take a look. As one of Chicago's most powerful men, who would dare to provoke him like this? Timothy Larson didn't back down and mustered enough courage to walk up to him. "Hello, Mr. Archer. I'm the manager of the Williams Company's newest branch. If you don't mind, I have a project that I'd like to discuss with you." Despite being terrified deep inside, he still pretended to act superior. He was hoping that the reputation of the Williams Company would resonate with Dominic. It was worth a try anyway. In fact, Timothy wanted to use this opportunity to make friends with Dominic Archer. If he had such a big backer like him in the future, on top of having a high position at the Williams Company, he didn't need to be afraid of anyone else. "You're from the Williams Company?" Dominic Archer asked in surprise. "Boss, he just destroyed one of the cars here and shouted at us. He even called us stupid," the salesperson explained to Archer in a low voice. "That's nothing compared to what the Williams Company could offer you, Mr. Archer." Timothy Larson looked him in the eye with confidence. "The Williams Company's reputation does hold some weight with me," Dominic Archer answered very casually. After all, he knew that the Williams Company was owned by Kevin, so despite his own increasing reputation, Dominic Archer still had to treat him with respect. "Now that you know who I work for, I was hoping that you might be able to help me teach that reckless guy a lesson. In exchange, I'll treat you to a meal tonight, and we can discuss our future partnership from there." Timothy couldn't help but feel delighted that his plan was going to work. However, when Dominic looked in the direction where Timothy was pointing, he was stunned, especially when he saw the mischievous smile on Kevin's lips. This made his heart beat faster all of a sudden. Recalling the miserable fate of the Jones family along with the Blair and Butler families, Dominic Archer couldn't help but shudder now that Kevin was back in Chicago. At his level, Dominic had inside information on a lot of things that other people didn't know about. And while ordinary people only thought that those three families were destroyed because of Kevin, he was aware of one more thing. that this seemed to have something to do with a much bigger game that Kevin was playing down in St. Louis. What happened in Chicago was just a little bit of an aftershock. While he had little information on the specifics, it was enough to show how powerful Kevin truly was. Even though the two places were quite far apart, Kevin's activities in St. Louis had somehow caused the death of several families in Chicago. And if Dominic Archer happened to be caught in the middle of the aftershock, he wasn't quite sure whether he and the rest of the Archer family would be able to survive in one piece or not.
Mr. Archer, quickly order your men to break his legs. I'll surely find a way to thank you later.
Timothy smiled at him broadly. Dominic turned his head around and stared at Timothy with a puzzled expression on his face as he asked, "Are you really from the Williams Company?" "What do you mean by that? My husband is the manager of the Williams Company's newest branch. If you don't believe me, you can ask around." Emma proudly raised her chin and remarked, "You're a person with a lot of connections, aren't you? This shouldn't be news to you." Dominic Archer's men all had murderous expressions on their faces. They looked at Emma like she was the biggest fool they'd ever seen. They didn't understand why this woman was being so arrogant. They'd never seen anyone who dared to talk down to Dominic Archer like that in front of everyone. Dominic pointed at Kevin and asked Timothy, "You say you're from the Williams Company, right? Do you have any idea who this man is?"
Isn't he just a good-for-nothing son-in-law?
Timothy sneered at Kevin and said with disgust,
"How can I know a lowlife like him? It's just that our wives were former classmates back in college. I only met him today."
Hearing such rude and ignorant words, Dominic Archer wanted to slap the man to death then and there. "You should call your company and ask who Kevin is." Dominic no longer wanted to waste any more time with him.
"Kevin? Kevin who? How am I supposed to find out who he is without knowing his last name?"
Timothy thought to himself as he made a quick phone call. Then Dominic Archer turned around and walked quickly towards Kevin. When she saw this, Lily instinctively trembled and held Kevin's arm even more tightly, but she didn't take a step back and stayed by his side. Dominic Archer smiled and stretched out his hand. "I wasn't expecting you to come into my store. I'm truly honored by your presence. Why didn't you call me ahead of time so that I could prepare something in advance?" "I would have, Dominic, but this was all a surprise. My wife was just curious how much that pink Bugatti of yours cost, so we came inside to inquire. However, your salesperson forced me to buy a car as compensation for wasting his time. Otherwise, he was going to break my leg," Kevin replied calmly. "If I say anything more, won't I lose my life?" The smile on Dominic Archer's face immediately disappeared when Kevin told him that. He slapped the salesperson so hard that he saw stars as he fell to the floor with a loud thud. "You've only been working in the store for a few days, and you've already caused me trouble. Is this how you treat our customers?" Dominic started slapping the man around, and it looked like he wasn't ever going to stop. All the onlookers were wondering what the heck was going on. When the pink Bugatti's price was revealed to be $19 million, Timothy Larson tried to use the salesperson's rudeness as an excuse not to buy the car. However, the salesperson saw right through this and revealed that the dealership was actually owned by Dominic Archer. He then demanded that Timothy had to buy the car or face severe consequences. When Kevin couldn't help but laugh at this, the salesperson told Kevin that he had to buy a car worth at least $1 million. And he threatened to break his legs if he didn't have the money. The surrounding crowd was surprised at the salesperson's ruthlessness. "If you're so arrogant and cruel, then you'd better call your superiors and see if they also have the courage to lay a hand on me." Kevin raised his eyebrows and teased the man. "Why would I need to involve them in this? I don't need to do much to deal with a poor kid like you." The salesperson snorted in disdain.
"Hey, buddy, how about you just save us some trouble and forget that any of this ever happened? I'll even treat you to a meal on behalf of the Williams Company as compensation. How about that?" Timothy still had some sense of superiority.
After all, the Williams Company carried a lot of weight in Chicago, and he believed that anyone who had some resources wouldn't dare to refuse the opportunity. As expected, the salesperson slightly relaxed his gaze, and the way he looked at Timothy Larson changed a little. "Since they have the protection of the Williams Company, what do you guys plan to do?" The salesperson crossed his arms in front of his chest, looked at Kevin, and sternly said, "Are you going to buy a car, or do you want to have your legs broken?" Emma offered her advice. "Lily, I think you should just buy a car. The Jones family isn't so poor that you can't even afford a less expensive one. Isn't that so?" Emma had just returned to Chicago a few days before, so she didn't know about the Jones family's murder. Unintentional as it may have been, Emma's words undoubtedly hurt Lily's feelings. It made her eyes start to well up with tears. "Lily, why aren't you saying anything? Could it be that the Jones family has already gone bankrupt?" Emma thought that she'd figured out the reason for Lily's hesitation and began to get excited. "No wonder you ended up marrying such a poor man. It turns out that your family doesn't have the status to prevent you from making a fool of yourself." Emma sneered and gloated at Lily's expense. "That's okay, Lily. You're still young and beautiful. You can just divorce him and marry another guy. But I'm very curious as to who would want a woman who has slept with a poor man. Perhaps you're simply destined to suffer in this lifetime." Just as she finished speaking, everyone heard a crisp sound, and Emma spun a few times, then fell to the floor in a daze. There was a large palm print on her cheek where she'd been slapped. "I hate people with big mouths the most. You can say all the bad things you want about me, but I won't let you keep insulting my wife like that." Kevin's eyes showed how disgusted he was with her. Emma Larson was stunned for a moment before she came back to her senses. Then she looked at Kevin angrily. You actually dare to hit a woman like me? What kind of man are you?" Emma stared at Kevin in disbelief. "I'm not afraid of being judged for defending my wife, and I don't dare to hit you. I already did it," Kevin replied harshly. "Hubby, look what he did to me. Don't just stand there. Help me get even with him." Emma began to sob like a little kid.
"How dare you hit my wife? You just made a big mistake. Do you know that?"
Timothy roared fiercely.
"Who in Chicago doesn't know the Williams Company's reputation? Tell me, how are you going to compensate me for what you've done?"
The people around them sighed and shook their heads one after another, but none of them disagreed with what Timothy had just said. The Williams Company reputation in Chicago was beyond reproach. Even Dominic Archer and Drake Cook couldn't hold a candle to them. "Is the Williams Company really that great?" Kevin's voice sounded especially deep, as if a ball of fury was brewing in his chest. When these words came out of his mouth, everyone was dumbfounded. They looked at Kevin as if he was some kind of fool. "What the hell? Where did this guy come from? How doesn't he know about the Williams Company?" One of the onlookers gasped. "Judging from the way he's dressed, it's very likely that he's just one of those country bumpkins that just stumbled into our city." Another one sneered. "Well, regardless of where he came from, he's offended someone from the Williams Company. I reckon that this kid will be dead soon," a third onlooker commented. When he heard all the comments, Timothy suddenly laughed. He was amused by Kevin's ignorance.
"Look, I'm not afraid to tell you that the Williams Company is really powerful. People like you can't even enter our company's gate. If you know what's good for you, you better kneel on the ground and lower your head to acknowledge my superiority. After that, you should let your wife spend the night with me, if you know what I mean."
Timothy smiled mischievously and winked at Lily.
"If I'm satisfied, maybe I can put in a good word with HR to hire you as a janitor in our newest branch. It's much better than relying on your wife to pay your bills."
Kevin sneered at Timothy and asked him, "Am I supposed to thank you for your kind offer?"
"No need to thank me. If you want to leave this dealership in one piece, you better do as I say. Otherwise, you'll have to suffer the consequences."
Timothy arrogantly puffed out his chest. Although he couldn't afford to offend Dominic Archer's people, Timothy believed that Kevin was just a useless son-in-law who he'd had the bad luck to run into. With the reputation of the Williams Company behind him, he could easily crush him. But before Timothy could say anything else, Kevin suddenly slapped him in the face as well. Although he tried his best to control his strength, because of the massive increase in his energy base, how could Timothy or anyone else in the place stand a chance against him? As a result, Timothy was sent flying through the air like a rag doll. He landed on a car worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, leaving a deep dent in its hood. When they saw this, the onlookers all gasped in astonishment. "My God, who is this guy? He actually had the nerve to hit someone who works for the Williams Company." One of the onlookers was in disbelief.
"This time he's definitely finished. He surely won't be able to talk his way out of this,"
another concluded. Meanwhile, the dumbfounded salesperson also gulped in surprise. Once he came back to his senses, he looked at Kevin with sudden admiration.
"Young man, I can see that you're good at fighting. Are you interested in joining us?"
The salesperson smiled and added,
"You'll certainly get in a lot of trouble after beating up someone from the Williams Company. In my opinion, the only one who can save you right now is Mr. Archer."
At the same time, the salesperson was thinking that if he introduced such a powerful person to Dominic Archer, he'd definitely benefit from it. He might even be promoted and put in charge of the entire car dealership. His response attracted everyone's surprise, and they all looked at Kevin enviously. How did this lowlife suddenly get so lucky? But a second later, Kevin did something that no one expected. Just as he'd done with Timothy, Kevin forcefully rejected the salesperson's offer, kicking him in the chest with such great force that the man went flying backward and crashed into a wall. Before the salesperson could recover his strength, Kevin grabbed his hair and dragged him up from the floor. "I'm not interested in wasting time with nobody like you. I want to speak to someone with authority, so you better get Dominic Archer over here right away." Kevin stared into his eyes coldly and growled, "I'd like to see if he would dare to break my legs." When they heard this, the salesperson and the onlookers were all dumbfounded. Timothy, who had just gotten up from the floor, was also stunned. And even Emma stopped crying when she heard Kevin say that. Lily was probably the only one who wasn't surprised by any of this, and she was the calmest of all. "Hurry up and call for reinforcements. I'll let you bring as many men as you want." Kevin tossed the salesperson aside like he was handling a bag of trash. When this happened, the whole store went into an uproar. "Am I seeing things? This kid actually dared to hit one of Dominic Archer's men?" One of the onlookers was shocked. "You're wrong. He didn't dare to do it. He already hit him. And not only that, he just threw him out." Another echoed Kevin's words from earlier. "If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, who would believe it?" Just then, some people finally pushed through the crowd, but they weren't fellow customers who were looking to help Kevin. On the contrary, they were the other salespeople. And as they quickly walked forward one after another, they surrounded Kevin looking extremely unfriendly. "Kid, how dare you hit one of our brothers? Be careful what you do or I'll throw you into the lake to feed the fish," one of the other salespeople threatened. "It's been a long time since anyone has dared to cause trouble in here. It'll definitely feel nice to relax and unwind by teaching you a lesson," another one sneered. "Didn't this lowlife ask for our brother to call for reinforcements? He'll be sorry for what he wished for. He won't be strong enough to fight with so many of us all by himself," a third one mocked. Lily walked up to Kevin and took his arm. Although she didn't say a word to the dozen or so fierce-looking salespeople, they believed that she was going to try to leave with Kevin.
"If you guys beat him to death, I guarantee that the Williams Company will sign a partnership with your boss."
Timothy roared loudly. He had a fierce look in his eyes. Meanwhile, the salesperson who Kevin had kicked and sent flying earlier had been on the phone for some time. When he finally hung up, he gave Timothy a knowing look and then whispered something to the person next to him.
"What are you all still standing there for? Why aren't you making a move yet?"
Timothy yelled at them angrily. When Dominic Archer arrived at the store, Timothy Larson took the opportunity to introduce himself as the manager of the Williams Company's latest branch and offered to do a project together in exchange for teaching someone a lesson. However, when Dominic found out who Timothy was referring to, he shuddered and told him to call the Williams Company to ask who Kevin was. However, when Dominic went to greet him, Kevin shared with him how the salesperson had insulted and threatened him. When he heard this, Dominic slapped the salesperson and kicked him in the chest as he scolded him for mistreating Kevin. "Don't you know who you just offended? Tell me, do you still want to break his legs? He could make you disappear in a second." Dominic Archer kept cursing while he was beating the salesperson up. The people around them were stunned. How could Dominic Archer beat his own employee because of this young man who was dressed in such tattered clothes? When did such a fearsome person show up in Chicago? Even the famous Dominic Archer has to be polite to him, one of the onlookers exclaimed. However, the smarter ones had already thought of one thing. Kevin was definitely not as simple as he seemed on the surface. After all, someone who could make Dominic Archer treat him with such respect must have a prominent background. But no matter how hard they racked their brains, they couldn't figure out for certain who this young man was. What kind of reputation did Kevin have? In Chicago, Dominic Archer wouldn't even act this way towards Drake Cook, let alone almost anyone else. The only exception would probably be someone like Mitchell Cook, or someone with an even higher social status than him. After a few minutes, Dominic Archer finally stopped punching and kicking the salesperson. However, his subordinate's face was already beaten beyond recognition, and his appearance was especially frightening. "Are you still alive? If you're not dead, apologize immediately to President Williams." Dominic Archer then turned around and shouted at the other salespeople. "All of you, get over here right now. When I came in, you guys seemed to have surrounded President Williams with murderous intent. If you don't want to lose your lives, you better get down on your knees and apologize to him." The dozen or so men immediately rushed up to Kevin and knelt down on the floor. They all lowered their heads deeply, and no one dared to say a word as cold sweat was starting to drip from their foreheads and down onto the floor. Even the salesperson who had just been beaten up by Dominic Archer endured the pain in his body and gritted his teeth as he got up from the ground to kneel properly before Kevin. All of these men thought to themselves, if Dominic Archer had to be respectful to Kevin, then what nerve did they have to be so arrogant toward him? Before this, none of them knew who Kevin was, and they dared to insult and shout at him over and over. But now that they knew who they just upset, they instantly regretted their actions and dreaded any consequences that would follow.
"President Williams?"
At the same time, Timothy Larson, who'd been on the phone asking about Kevin, turned his head around. Since he only moved to Chicago the day he started his new job at the Williams Company's new branch, he still didn't manage to put two and two together. But when he saw what was happening, he almost dropped his phone on the floor. His wife Emma was also petrified. Similarly, the surrounding people who were watching this unfold suddenly got very excited.
"Please forgive me for not recognizing you. I take back everything I said. I never imagined that I would make such a grave error in judgment."
The badly beaten salesperson profusely apologized to Kevin. However, Dominic Archer didn't care about the other people. He was willing to give them all up just to please Kevin.
"President Williams, you can do whatever you want with them. I can have them all thrown into Lake Michigan to feed the fish if you just give the word."
"Dominic, are you sure?" Kevin asked with a terrifying smile. This made everyone's heart skip a beat. No one had expected that Kevin, who looked weak and somewhat poor, was really only pretending to be a lowlife to play around with them. But he was also ruthless when provoked.
"As long as it'll help make things up to you, it's fine with me. It's the least I can do as compensation for their offense."
Dominic frowned slightly inside. In the past, he would definitely not have been this afraid of Kevin, but now things were different. Not only was Kevin richer than ever, but he could even afford to play around with Dominic as much as he wished. At the same time, Timothy Larson was back on his phone. Despite being a new hire for their latest branch, he knew someone who happened to work in the Williams Company's headquarters, so it wasn't difficult for him to look into Kevin's true identity.
"What's wrong, Mr. Larson? Why are you suddenly calling me?"
Mark Turner asked in surprise. Back when Kevin bought the penthouse at Corwin Tower, Mark Turner had stood up for him even without knowing who he was. Since then, because he'd constantly proven his competence and abilities, he was promoted by Miss Wilson 2 or 3 times.
"Mr. Turner, what are you talking about? Can't I just catch up with a friend? Anyway, I just wanted to call and ask if there's a person named Kevin in the headquarters. He's been referred to as President Williams as well for some reason. Please ask the HR department to investigate him for me."
Timothy Larson had a bad feeling about all of this. As expected, after he finished speaking, Mark Turner fell silent.
"What happened, Mr. Turner? Why are you being so quiet all of a sudden?"
Timothy's bad premonition seemed to be coming true. "Did you get into a fight with him?" Mark asked in a low and stern voice.
"There was just a small conflict, but it wasn't a big one. If you find that he doesn't have any significant position in the headquarters, can you help me deal with this issue? I'll definitely thank you properly in the future,"
Timothy said with a smile. He didn't notice the change in Mark Turner's tone at all. "Mr. Larson, I'm sorry, but I can't help you with this matter. You should solve it yourself. But if I were you, I'd apologize immediately to Mr. Williams before things get even worse for you," Mark advised him. Mark Turner still remembered how Kevin had handled Edward Ambrose, so he knew what he was capable of.
"Wait, what's wrong?"
Timothy's smile suddenly disappeared. He said without thinking,
"Is that lowlife really so important? These people were calling him president after all. Then again, he wasn't dressed very well. Could it be that he's the son of the CEO?
"That's enough, Mr. Larson. The less you say, the better. Let me tell you that Mr. Williams is definitely someone that you cannot afford to offend. It's almost all because of him that I'm in my current position today. Don't be silly enough to judge someone by his appearance." Mark really wanted to slap this guy a couple of times himself. How could he still not figure out who Kevin was? "I have a meeting to attend soon, so I can't talk nonsense with you anymore. I'm just warning you not to take Mr. Williams too lightly. He can kill you with a single flick of his wrist." After saying this, Mark Turner abruptly hung up the phone. Timothy's heart sank. While Mark Turner was only an acquaintance of his, he knew him well enough to figure that Kevin must be pretty terrifying for a person in his position to be afraid. And while he didn't know much, he could tell that Kevin wasn't as simple as he appeared to be. Meanwhile, on the other side of the store, Kevin thought for a long time and patted Dominic Archer's shoulder gently. "I think we should just forget about this incident. You just need to discipline your men better in the future. Don't let them treat their customers so badly." The dozen or so men who were kneeling on the ground let out a long sigh of relief. "President Williams, you're really a big shot now. An ordinary person wouldn't have as much patience and mercy as you do. There's nobody like you in all of Chicago." Dominic Archer praised him with a big laugh and then turned around to scold his men. "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and thank President Williams." "Thank you, President Williams," the men quickly reacted. The salesperson who'd been beaten up was especially gracious, crying an endless stream of tears from his swollen eyes. Just then, Timothy walked up to them hesitantly. He had a desperate look on his face.
"If you're so important, why are you dressed in rags like this? It seems that I seriously misjudged you,"
Timothy admitted reluctantly. "What's wrong with the way I'm dressed? Regardless of what clothes I prefer to wear, it was wrong for you to show off like that." Kevin suddenly asked him, "Did you finally figure out who I am?" "Do you need my help to deal with him?" Dominic Archer asked eagerly. "Forget it. I don't want your reputation to be tainted by dealing with this kind of person. Someone else will teach him a lesson," Kevin knowingly remarked. The moment Timothy had introduced himself as a manager for the Williams Company and started talking to Lily earlier, Kevin had already sent a text message to Miss Wilson. She should have found his phone number by now. Kevin was just thinking about this when Timothy Larson's phone rang.
"Hello? Who is this?"
Timothy asked with a slight frown. Miss Wilson got straight to the point. "I'm Sandra Wilson, Chief of Staff of the Williams Company. Mr. Larson, I understand that you've recently been hired as the Deputy Manager of the Project Design Department in our latest branch. Now I'm calling to inform you that the headquarters has officially removed you from your position and terminated you from the company. Please return as soon as possible and empty your desk. Security will be there to escort you." Timothy Larson was dumbfounded when he heard that. Why did the headquarters suddenly fire him?
"May I ask the reason why?"
Timothy asked weakly. After getting off the phone with Mark Turner, Timothy Larson walked up to Kevin. He then admitted to him that he'd been wrong for misjudging him based on his choice of clothes. When Dominic Archer offered to deal with the man accordingly, Kevin told him not to worry and that someone else would teach him a lesson. Just then, Miss Wilson called Timothy to inform him that he'd been fired from the Williams Company. Dumbfounded by this news, Timothy asked her the reason for a sudden termination. "You've offended someone you shouldn't have." Miss Wilson decisively cut off the call after saying this. Timothy Larson's heart was filled with shock when he heard that. He'd just arrived in Chicago and, as a new hire of the Williams Company's newest branch, he couldn't possibly know who Kevin was. Moreover, the only person he knew at the headquarters was Mark Turner, and the only reason why the two of them were acquaintances was because they'd gotten to know each other at a cocktail party in New York 3 years before. Timothy thought to himself,
"Who the hell is President Kevin Williams?"
Suddenly, it hit him. If even Miss Wilson, the Chief of Staff, claimed that Kevin was someone he couldn't offend, the only possibility remaining was that the person standing in front of him right now was actually the CEO of the Williams Company. How could he have only realized Kevin's true identity now? It seems that someone has already informed him, and he's finally figured it out. Kevin smiled and crossed his arms in front of his chest. "What are you talking about, you good-for-nothing lowlife? How can you smile so arrogantly at my husband like that?" Emma Larson walked over and scolded him. "My husband has been nothing but kind to you. He's already offered you a way out of this, and yet you continue to treat him with disrespect. Why don't you go and look up the Williams Company? That way you'll know who you're messing with. These people may have chosen to let you go for now, but that doesn't mean that I'm done arguing with you." Emma sneered. "How dare you slap me? Or have you already forgotten about that, you useless son-in-law? Today I'll make my husband find someone to get even with you." But before Emma could say anything else, Timothy suddenly put his hand over his wife's mouth.
"What the hell are you doing? Who told you that you have the right to speak to President Williams like this?" Timothy roared loudly. "This whole mess was all because of you. The only thing you know how to do is to cause trouble for me from sunup to sundown."
Emma Larson defiantly shoved his hand away from her mouth. "Hubby, why are you siding with this person over me? He's just a useless son-in-law, but I'm your wife. Stop treating him like your mistress." The anger in Emma's heart immediately flared up.
"Don't you know who he is? He may not be my mistress, but now that you've made me offend him, what will become of me? I'll lose everything that I have because of you."
Timothy reprimanded her loudly. This scene made all the onlookers confused. Why did the couple suddenly start quarreling?
"This is what I get for choosing you over my mistress. Why do you always have to look down on others and drag me down with you? I can't deal with this right now." I don't want to see your face ever again."
Timothy's chest was heaving up and down violently. Kevin wasn't in the mood to deal with them any longer. He simply smiled at Lily and took her by the hand as they walked out the door. However, after taking a few steps, he suddenly stopped. "By the way, Dominic, about that pink Bugatti over there. Have your men send it over to the second building of the Salix Leaf Complex. As for the money, someone will call you shortly to settle for the car," Kevin said happily as he smiled broadly. "Did you hear what President Williams said? Why did you ever doubt him as a potential buyer? Don't worry, someone will send it over this evening." Dominic Archer gave the salespeople a stern gaze before smiling back at Kevin. "Now tell me, can I afford this car?" Kevin's eyes stopped on the salesperson who had insulted him earlier. The man quickly nodded his head and anxiously replied,
"Yes, you certainly can afford it, President Williams."
All of the dealership's salespeople were actually blade-wielding hatchet men who'd been following Dominic Archer around Chicago and dealing with his enemies. Given Dominic's rapid expansion and takeover of areas and businesses that the Steele family had left behind, it just so happened that they had been temporarily assigned to the dealership to be salespeople because of the shortage of manpower. Not used to the patient and friendly attitude that the job required, it was inevitable that they wouldn't be able to adjust their ways so quickly. Still, none of them expected that they would actually run into some trouble today. Seeing all their regretful faces, Kevin laughed lightly as he left the store with Lily. "Kick these two out!" Dominic Archer pointed at Timothy and Emma Larson, who were still arguing over what had happened to them. Dominic felt lucky that he had been there to mediate the situation and make sure that Kevin was appeased. Otherwise, something bad might have happened. Then he took out his phone and called his sister, Gwen Archer. Back in the main hall of the Thompson family's mansion in St. Louis, Richard Swinton and Joseph Thompson were discussing some important matters. Joseph Thompson took a sip of coffee and asked, "Do you know when Mr. Williams will return to St. Louis? It's not like we can do anything about the stalemate between us and the Huxley family until he comes back."
"Kevin said he had to go back to Chicago for work. I don't know when he'll come back here, but now that the Radiance has arrived in St. Louis, I'm sure that a mere nuisance like Virgil Huxley won't be able to stir up much trouble." Richard Swinton didn't have any worries in his heart. "Previously, you promised those riled-up citizens that Kevin would give them an explanation in 3 days' time. Now that he's no longer in St. Louis, I'm curious to see what explanation you plan to give them when the time comes," Joseph said once again with some concern. "What are you so afraid of? After all, you were by my side at the time. Anyway, I doubt any of those people would dare to come to our home to cause trouble." Richard smiled wickedly. His attitude stunned Joseph Thompson. He didn't expect Richard Swinton to play such a dirty trick on them. "Why are you giving me that look? Don't worry. I've already sent someone to investigate who was behind the protests. For thousands of people to have suddenly gathered to cause trouble like that, someone prominent must have added fuel to the fire behind the incident and tipped them off about the Dixon brothers' true identity. Otherwise, they wouldn't have figured it out and come after the Radiant so suddenly." Richard waved his hand and explained. Before Joseph Thompson could reply, Richard Swinton's phone suddenly rang. Someone from his family's mansion had just called using a staff member's phone. Without waiting for Richard to speak, the man on the other end of the line urgently reported, "Sir, something bad happened. Curtis Green, who we've been keeping locked away in his room, has been killed." Richard Swinton instantly stood up when he heard this. "Are you sure? You're not joking with me, are you?" "Sir, I wouldn't dare to joke with you about something like this," the man reassured him respectfully. "We hope you can come back here immediately." After Richard Swinton hung up the phone, Joseph Thompson put down the coffee mug in his hand and asked, "What's wrong with you? Is your mansion on fire or something?" Richard slowly turned his head around and said ominously, "Curtis Green is dead." Joseph had the same reaction as the man who had just called.
Quickly, go and take a look." Meanwhile, inside Lily's apartment at the Salix Leaf complex in Chicago, Kevin and Lily had just returned when they saw Dorothy sitting on the sofa and chatting with a few women who looked to be around her age. "Oh, Dorothy, your life is really good. I didn't expect your son-in-law to be the CEO of the Williams Company. If only I'd found out about it sooner," one of the women exclaimed. "I thought your son-in-law was really someone who just lived off you and your daughter. But it turns out that he was simply hiding his strength and biding his time. If he doesn't cause any trouble, I'm sure he'll amaze the world with what he can do," another woman commented with more than a hint of praise in her voice. "Dorothy, now that you've already started reaping all the benefits and enjoying yourself, don't forget about all of us all of a sudden," a third one reminded her. Hearing these words of praise, Dorothy felt as if they were being excessive. She smiled and laughed so hard that her jaw started to ache. "What do you mean by enjoying my life? That son-in-law of mine continues to be useless to me. He's so used to ordering me around like a household staff member. So if any of you start treating him a little better, I'm sure it will go to his head. When that happens, who knows what he'll think of doing to make me suffer? Sisters, if there's anything you want to do for me, please protect me from him in the future," Dorothy said as she rolled her eyes. "Don't say that. I'm sure things will improve in the future. Anyway, I really have something to ask of you. I heard that the Williams Company media arm specializes in nurturing celebrities. As you know, my daughter is only in her 20s, and I have high aspirations for her to become a famous star. Do you think you can ask your good son-in-law to sign her as a client?" one of Dorothy's friends immediately echoed. "After all, he is the CEO. Something this minor shouldn't be a problem for him, don't you agree?" Seeing that Dorothy was about to agree to something again without Kevin's consent, Lily quickly walked up to her mother and announced, "Mom, Kevin and I are back." "If you're back, what does that have to do with me? Don't tell me I still need to open the door for you," Dorothy replied faintly and didn't even look at Kevin. Kevin shrugged his shoulders. He couldn't understand why Dorothy still hated him so much. Not wanting to ask for any more trouble, he planned to go upstairs and rest for a while. However, Dorothy's friend stopped him. "Dorothy, this must be your son-in-law, right? I never realized how handsome and elegant he looked before," one of the women exclaimed as she gave Kevin a big smile. "Being a CEO definitely adds a certain charm. If only my son had half of his potential," another one added. All of Dorothy's friends enthusiastically walked up to Kevin. They kept gawking at him and fawning over him as if they were in the presence of royalty. At the Salix Leaf complex in Chicago, Kevin and Lily had just returned home when they found Dorothy entertaining some friends. Since they were all aware that Kevin was the CEO of the Williams Company, everyone started praising Dorothy for having such a good son-in-law, which she denied and laughed at the idea. When one of them started asking for a favor, Lily stepped inside the apartment before Dorothy could agree to anything. Upon greeting her, Dorothy coldly replied to Lily and didn't even look at Kevin. To avoid causing trouble, Kevin planned to go upstairs, but he was stopped by Dorothy's friends, who started heaping praise on him like he was a king. "Well, what are you waiting for? Hurry up and call someone to sign my friend's daughter as a client, and give her the best manager in the company." Dorothy raised her head and reprimanded him sternly. "Don't embarrass me in front of my friends." The last thing she wanted right now was for Kevin to steal the spotlight away from her. "Good evening, everyone," Kevin called out helplessly. He didn't know what else to say. "President Williams, your mother-in-law and I are good friends. Just now I was telling her that I wanted to send my daughter over to your company. What do you think?" The woman's name was Cynthia Boone. She'd known Dorothy since they were classmates in school. Cynthia continued, "I'm not just saying this to brag about my daughter to you, but her singing voice is very pleasant to the ears. Moreover, her figure and appearance are very attractive. As long as you train her a little and market her well, she'll definitely become your next big star." Seeing Cynthia Boone become more and more arrogant as she spoke, Kevin only awkwardly scratched his chin and didn't say anything. In the Archer family's mansion, Gwen and Dominic Archer were discussing how to build on their relationship with Kevin.
Sis, when I met Kevin today, I found that his energy base seemed to have increased again. I couldn't sense his aura at all.
Dominic Archer took a puff of his cigar as he recalled what had happened earlier. This was the main reason why he'd been so polite to Kevin. Any martial arts expert would usually be able to feel the presence and fluctuation of spiritual energy from another person's body. For example, when Kevin faced the Night King previously, his mentor's aura made him feel like he was imprisoned in a deep abyss. However, despite being a level 3 expert, Dominic Archer couldn't feel anything at all this time. It only showed that Kevin's strength had exceeded his scope of understanding. Kevin is indeed a powerful man. Not long ago, I wanted to learn herbalism under his mentorship, but he still hasn't replied to me, Gwen Archer admitted reluctantly. Now, both Mitchell Cook and Adriana Wright have become his trusted colleagues. If you add the Williams Company on top of that, Kevin has already taken control of the entire economy of Chicago. And if we don't do anything, we might not even have the right to speak freely around here in the future. Dominic Archer flicked the ashes of his cigar and looked thoughtfully up at the ceiling.
Well, what can we do? Kevin is in a completely different league from us.
Previously, the siblings wanted to be the ones to find Lily and Phoebe as a way to establish a stronger relationship with Kevin. Unfortunately, things didn't go according to their wishes, as Kevin apparently didn't need their help at all. Gwen suddenly thought of something. Doesn't Kevin have a good relationship with Dalton Steele? Right now, the Steele family's strength is declining rapidly. If we can help Dalton Steele return to his original position, wouldn't that be...
Absolutely not.
Dominic vehemently interrupted his sister's words.
Aren't you forgetting how difficult it was to gain a foothold over them? It took an outside force for our three-way battle to turn into a fair fight that we had a chance to win. Now that the Steele family has fallen, we don't have to worry about defeating them anymore. We only need to deal with Drake Cook to become the most powerful family in Chicago. If we help Dalton Steele, wouldn't that just throw another wrench in our plans?
Gwen Archer didn't answer her brother's question. She kept thinking about the problem she was facing and what else they could do to gain Kevin's support. After all, since Mitchell Cook was a trusted ally of Kevin, Drake Cook also served a purpose for him since he always followed his father's orders. If the Archer family didn't make any concessions, Kevin could definitely help Drake Cook make a move in the future to deal with the two of them. On the other hand, Dalton Steele was Kevin's brother, so while he was still recovering at the moment, it wouldn't be impossible for him to return to his peak condition, with Kevin by his side. Just then, Gwen Archer suddenly had another idea. Bro, why don't I call Kevin and ask him out? Gwen had already made a decision about what their next step should be. At the mountain peak where the Central Alternative Healing Academy's headquarters was located, the once beautiful scenery was now covered in a layer of blood. In just a few days, all the major schools' reinforcements had arrived. As a result, the Alliance's army was losing ground because there was only one area that still remained in their hands. By now, both sides had suffered heavy casualties. Blood flowed like rivers and bones were piled up in stacks. It was definitely not a sight to see for the faint-hearted. In the Alliance's camp, the Sergeant-at-Arms King looked at the Central Alternative Healing Academy's headquarters from afar, with a serious expression on his face. He clenched his fists tightly, and his eyes were filled with an unwillingness to admit defeat.
The latest casualty count has been calculated, sir. More than 30,000 of our men have died so far, while 13,000 have been injured, a subordinate of the Alliance reported respectfully. Also, we don't have many medicinal pills left to treat the injuries. How should we proceed, sir?
What other choice do we have now? The major schools have already regained a firm foothold in most areas, erasing all of our efforts. Moreover, our remaining forces won't last against all of them for too long. Only if the Alliance leader comes here in person along with our highest level experts as reinforcements will we have a chance of winning. The Sergeant-at-Arms King thought for a while before he spoke again. I'll write a letter immediately. Once it's ready, make a trip back to the headquarters and hand it directly to the Alliance leader. It's up to him to decide whether we'll keep fighting or retreat. Back at the Salix Leaf complex in Chicago, it was already getting late, so Dorothy sent her friends on their way. In the living room, Lily held the back of Kevin's hand. Sorry about all the trouble, Kevin. Dorothy's friends had made a lot of unreasonable requests. One of them had a son who was a fresh graduate from a top university. Instead of doing nothing at home, his mother figured that he could work for the Williams Company as a manager, and let Kevin take care of the rest to ensure that he would become as successful as Kevin someday. Another one had a nephew who was the manager of a small company. Since he was in a difficult position as a new father, his aunt wanted Kevin to consider letting him join the Williams Company so that he could earn enough income to support his growing family. But among all of these favors, the most outrageous one was from Cynthia Boone. Not only did she want her daughter to sign with the Williams Company, but she also wanted her to enjoy the full star treatment. On top of that, Cynthia demanded that her daughter could not work more than 5 hours a day, and Kevin had to see to it that she would become famous without doing anything difficult. How was she going to work then? Her job sounded like it was going to be a pure vacation. All of this made Lily feel very uncomfortable, but she felt that it wouldn't be good for Kevin if she were to explode in front of her mother. That's okay, Lily. Anyway, I didn't agree to any of their requests yet, Kevin casually replied. He wasn't blaming Lily for any of this. At this time, Dorothy had already returned after sending her friends off. When she saw Kevin sitting on the sofa, her face immediately turned sour. Why are you still sitting here? Go and arrange the things that my friends ordered. Dorothy snapped at him with disgust. You may be the CEO of the Williams Company now, but you're still my son-in-law. Do you understand? If you don't listen to me, you'll have to divorce my daughter. Mom, what are you talking about? It's not like you didn't hear what those people were asking of him. Kevin's company is a big business. How could they possibly expect him to cater to all of their demands? Lily couldn't help but set her mother straight. Why not? Even if he's the CEO, I don't think that the Williams Company is as good as the rumors say. Dorothy suddenly thought of something as she turned to Kevin. By the way, it's not good for the company to be run by a useless CEO like you. Whoever manages the company will end up setting an example for the rest of its employees. That being said, I think you should hand the company over to Lily. Kevin had long guessed that Dorothy would say that at some point, so he wasn't affected by this at all. Mom, don't say that. I don't have the ability to manage the Williams Company. Lily was so angry that she couldn't take it anymore. Besides, that is Kevin's company. How could I even think of taking it from him? You're more capable than this freeloading husband of yours. How big of a risk did we take because of him this time? Dorothy continued with her arms crossed. We almost lost our lives, Lily. Isn't it reasonable for him to give the company to you? It's the least that he could do after everything we've had to endure. Dorothy wasn't done yet. Look at him. If he continues to manage the Williams Company like this, sooner or later the company will collapse. Instead of letting others manage the company, he might as well put you in charge of all the decision-making. What Mom said makes sense, Kevin remarked with a fake smile. Of course what I said makes sense. It's late now, so you can keep your company for tonight and hand it over to Lily tomorrow. But as for all the things that my friends have instructed you to do, you must take care of them now, or else I won't allow you to sleep here tonight. Dorothy just wouldn't let up. Then again, you still have a lot of money now, so it doesn't matter if you continue to live here or not. But whichever way you decide, I won't let my daughter keep putting her own life on hold for you forever.
When Dorothy returned to the living room after sending her friends home, she told Kevin that, as her son-in-law, he had to follow all of her orders to the letter. That meant he had to take care of all her friends' unreasonable demands to hire their relatives. In addition to this, he had to hand over the Williams Company to Lily as compensation for all of the hardships that they had to endure because of him. And if Kevin refused any of these demands, Dorothy threatened to kick him out of the apartment, as well as banning them from their lives altogether. When he heard Dorothy's ultimatum, Kevin agreed with a fake smile. The meaning behind her words was very clear. She was obviously using Lily to manipulate Kevin. As long as he didn't agree to any of her conditions, they would have to divorce. Lily tried to reason with her mother. "Mom?" Dorothy waved her hand to interrupt Lily. She stared at Kevin coldly and sneered.
"What do you have to say about what I just said?"
"I understand completely, Mom. Don't worry, I'll take care of everything," Kevin remarked with an embarrassed smile.
"Then why are you still sitting there on the sofa? Aren't you supposed to go out to buy some vegetables and come back here to cook us some dinner? Or are you expecting me to serve you?"
Dorothy spoke again.
"Don't think that being a CEO excuses you from the responsibilities of being my son-in-law. Otherwise, if word gets out that you've become even more useless and entitled than before, then everyone will gossip and say that I didn't discipline you well."
Kevin sighed lightly and stood up. Then he walked out the door. "Mom, what are you doing? I don't want to take away the Williams Company from Kevin," Lily protested.
"Listen to me. As your mother, I'm doing this for your own good. There have been many examples of husbands who turn bad after becoming rich. If I don't put the financial power of this family in your hands, what will happen if Kevin finds another woman one of these days?" Dorothy warned in a stern tone. "Besides, I heard that the eldest daughter of the Anderson family is very close to Kevin. Moreover, didn't she make sure to be the first to run up and hug him when he came back to Chicago? Now that the Jones family is no longer around, how can you compare with Phoebe Anderson? And if you divorce Kevin, how can we live without money in the future? Do you finally understand the reason why I'm doing this?" Dorothy looked at her daughter and sighed. For a while, she was filled with words of wisdom and felt like giving her a lecture. "That's all in your imagination, Mom. Anyway, I appreciate your concern, but I trust Kevin very much. No matter what you say, I won't take away the Williams Company from him." After saying this, Lily quickly walked upstairs. Despite this, she was in fact still quite worried about what Dorothy had said. Now that Kevin had become more and more of a mysterious stranger to her, Lily was really worried that she wasn't good enough for him anymore. What if one day Kevin suddenly felt that he didn't want her anymore? What would she do? At the Swinton family's mansion in St. Louis, the entire place was on high alert and every inch of the compound was overflowing with their guards. In the courtyard, Richard Swinton and Joseph Thompson were looking at Curtis Green, whose dead body was lying underneath a white cloth on a stretcher. Both of them were in a very solemn mood.
"How did he die?"
Richard asked glumly. "The man who was assigned to deliver meals to Curtis Green entered his room today and found him lying dead in his bed. After some preliminary testing, we found that he seemed to have died from poisoning." A staff member from the Swinton family answered respectfully. This reply caused a strong pressure to emit from Richard Swinton's body.
"Does this mean that someone managed to infiltrate my household and enter Curtis Green's room to poison him?"
Richard's voice became much louder.
"Are all of the guards in this mansion so incompetent? What's the use of having so many bodyguards when they can't even keep an eye on one single person? They had one job and they couldn't even do it right."
"Richard, calm down. Don't get so angry." Joseph patted him on the shoulder, trying his best to stop Richard from releasing a violent aura at his men. However, he couldn't do much to control him at the moment. This was because Joseph Thompson was an official in the federal government. So according to federal regulations, he couldn't use herbalism to train to become a martial arts expert. "Let me ask you, do you have any idea of who might have wanted to poison him? Also, who has gone in and out of the courtyard over the past 2 days?"
Joseph's emotions were naturally much more composed than Richard's at the moment. "Mr. Thompson, we've been doing our rounds all day and night to guard the courtyard. Aside from the other household staff and guards, only Mr. Swinton's daughter Gail came by yesterday. She said that she was here to deliver something to Curtis Green." The staff member didn't dare to hide anything and reported truthfully.
"What did you say? Gail came by to see him?"
Richard frowned intensely as if he had suddenly realized something. Joseph sighed deeply. "Richard, I'm afraid that Gail Swinton might have been used by someone. Don't be so quick to blame her without any evidence." At the same time, in Gail Swinton's room, Catherine Swinton was pacing back and forth. Her face was full of worry and anxiety as Gail had just told her everything. "What did you just say? Do you know how important Curtis Green was to your father and foster brother? How can you listen to Thornton Huxley and give him the poisoned food? Now that he's dead, you'll have to fess up and explain yourself to your father." Catherine sighed anxiously. She was disappointed in her daughter. "Right now, the Huxley family and the Swinton family are like fire and water, and you just helped your father and brother's mortal enemy." Gail Swinton's face turned pale when her mother said that, and she fell to her knees with a thud. Tears began streaming out of her eyes. "Mom, you can't do this to me. I'm your daughter, so you have to protect me. You know how scary Dad can get when he's angry. He definitely won't forgive me for this." Gail cried for help and was scared of facing the consequences. "Thornton only asked me to give the pastry to that person. It's not like I knew that there was poison in it. Mom, you must believe me." Catherine saw her little daughter crying and her heart began to ache for her. "It's not that I don't want to help you, it's just that you've caused too much trouble this time. Curtis Green played a critical role in determining your foster brother's success or failure here in St. Louis. Your father and Mr. Thompson have put in a lot of effort as well." Catherine helped Gail up from the floor. She gently patted her daughter's head and said earnestly, "Even if I want to help you, I don't know what to do either." "Why did that country bumpkin insist on coming to St. Louis in the first place? Wasn't his life in Chicago any good? Can't he just go back there if he fails here? Mom, I'm your daughter. He's not even your real son." Gail sobbed as she begged for mercy. Catherine sighed deeply. What Gail had said was really not very mature at all. She was clearly aware of the power that Kevin currently possessed. And with the Radiance backing him up, he'd already reached a status that most people could never dream of reaching in their lifetime. Even her relatives from the Armstrong family had heard about the events in St. Louis. In fact, they called yesterday to ask her to bring Kevin to their mansion as a guest, when she had the time. In the end, this wasn't a matter that only concerned Kevin. It involved the Swinton family, the Thompson family, and many influential people in St. Louis. Furthermore, it also involved the interests and safety of all the members of the Radiance. So no matter how much she loved her daughter, Catherine Swinton couldn't cover for Gail's inexcusable actions. Just then, Catherine and Gail were both startled by a loud sound. Richard Swinton angrily kicked the door open and walked in with fists clenched. He looked absolutely enraged. "Dad!" Gail hurriedly hid behind her mother and avoided her father's gaze. His appearance had frightened her terribly. "Hubby, don't be like this. You're scaring Gail," Catherine gently urged him.
"Scared? Isn't she very brave? She colluded with our enemies to poison Curtis Green."
Richard Swinton's expression didn't soften in the slightest as he turned his attention back to Gail.
"Stop hiding behind your mother. I'm telling you, no matter what, you better explain yourself to me right this instant."
Gail started crying again. She was so frightened that her legs began trembling and she fell to the floor. "Hubby, can't you see what you're doing to Gail? Look at her. She's crying nonstop because of you." Catherine kept persuading him to not harm their daughter.
"You should know very well what she's done. Gail must be taught a lesson. Otherwise, if you keep spoiling her, she'll never learn in the future."
Richard was so angry that his body was starting to emit a violent aura once again.
How am I going to explain this to Kevin when he comes back?
After all, it was Kevin who had dealt with the Blade Mountain bandits, which indirectly forced Virgil Huxley to hand Curtis Green over as a scapegoat. Furthermore, he knew that the Huxley family was hiding a lot of secrets as they engaged in illegal businesses. And as long as Curtis Green was in their custody, they would have a solid bargaining chip to keep the Huxley family in check. But now, because of what his daughter had done, all of their efforts to get rid of the Huxley family might end up in vain. "Hubby, please calm down. Gail is your daughter. Do you really have the heart to take your anger out on her?" Catherine said loudly. "Besides, it's just the Huxley family we're dealing with. Don't tell me our family is afraid of them. Furthermore, with the help of the Thompson family, it'll only be a matter of time before Virgil Huxley is defeated. And the end result would be the same even without the help of Curtis Green."
How can you be so sure of that? Virgil Huxley has been planning his takeover of St. Louis for many years. So how can all the seeds that he's planted be discovered and weeded out so easily?
Richard was seething with anger.
Gail must face the consequences, and you can't protect her no matter what.
Richard continued.
When I rushed back here after finding out what had happened, did you know that Joseph Thompson also came with me? Regardless of whether Gail did it on purpose or not, she won't be able to escape punishment. Even if I don't do anything to punish her, she must answer to the law.
"But hubby, she's our daughter." Catherine was completely flustered. As an official of the federal government, Joseph Thompson was famous for being upright and honest. Was Gail Swinton really doomed? "Mom, Dad, what's going on? Why are the two of you arguing in Gail's room?" Brenda quickly walked in. When she saw Richard looking at Gail contemptuously, she had a terrible feeling. "Dad, why are you so angry at Gail right now?" For the past few days, Brenda had been keeping herself occupied by practicing the meditation techniques that her mother had previously taught her and Kevin. She wanted to break through as a level 3 expert. However, the sudden commotion in Gail's room disrupted her focus and pulled her away from her meditative training. In her room at the Swinton family's mansion, Gail had just told her mother, Catherine, that she unintentionally poisoned Curtis Green because of Thornton Huxley. Just then, Richard Swinton suddenly kicked her door open. Unable to contain his anger, Richard told Gail that she had to be taught a lesson. With Gail visibly scared and begging for mercy, Catherine tried to calm him down. However, Richard sternly explained that, regardless of the circumstances, she would still have to face the consequences. After overhearing the commotion, Brenda entered Gail's room. Seeing her father looking at Gail so contemptuously, Brenda asked why he was angry with Gail.
"Just ask your sister what she did,"
Richard replied as he threw a chair across the room in anger. "Even if Curtis Green hadn't died today, he might not have been able to survive in St. Louis for long anyway, given that he was a wanted man. Why do you have to treat me like this, Dad? I'm your daughter," Gail spoke up hesitantly.
"You still have the nerve to justify your actions?"
Richard stepped around Catherine and angrily raised his hands like he was going to slap his daughter. Gail ducked down and dropped to her knees on the floor. Catherine, Gail, and Brenda all stared at Richard with their eyes open wide. While they knew Richard had a powerful aura and he wasn't afraid to use it on his enemies, he was known to be a good family man. So this was the first time that he'd come so close to using any type of force to teach one of his daughters a lesson. "Dad, did you really raise your hand at me because of that country bumpkin?" Gail was cowering in the corner of the room. Her eyes were filled with disbelief.
"Kevin is your brother, not some country bumpkin."
Richard raised his voice as he tried to change the subject. "Hubby, how can you threaten your own flesh and blood?" Catherine finally came back to her senses as she hugged her younger daughter and tried to comfort her. Brenda spoke up for her younger sister too. "Dad, you really have changed. Even if Gail has done millions of things wrong, you should never think of laying a hand on your own daughter." In the study of the Huxley family's mansion in St. Louis, Virgil, Huxley, and another man were sitting down across from one another. Virgil poured a cup of coffee and offered it to him.
"Why are you being so polite, Mr. Huxley?"
The man asked with a smile, but there was no emotion in his voice. Normally, this would make someone feel uncomfortable. However, Virgil Huxley didn't care one bit as he leisurely poured himself a strong cup of coffee.
"Mr. Shaw, you may not have heard the news yet, but I've confirmed that Curtis Green is now dead, thanks to the poison provided by the Stratus Group. One of Richard Swinton's own daughters unintentionally took the man's life, and she didn't realize it until it was already too late. With his death, the Swintons and the Thompsons will no longer be able to interfere with my family's plans anymore,"
Virgil explained. He was in an unusually good mood.
"Even though Curtis Green is dead, your family's crisis has yet to be fully resolved. The Radiance is still in St. Louis, and Kevin Williams has only left the city temporarily. Both of them still pose a great threat to your family,"
Damon Shaw cautioned him in a grim tone of voice. The smile on Virgil Huxley's face suddenly disappeared and was replaced by a deep frown.
"What if Kevin can't return to St. Louis? Can you find a way to ensure that?"
No one knew exactly when Kevin had become the person Virgil hated the most, but it was because of this young man that Virgil Huxley's years of painstaking effort and planning had effectively turned into dust. His power and status were still being actively held in check by both the Swinton and Thompson families. As a result, the Huxley family's influence in St. Louis was shrinking more and more every single day.
"There is a way, but the price might not be that cheap."
The corner of Damon Shaw's mouth rose slightly, like he was about to smile sinisterly.
"Money isn't a problem. I'm willing to increase the reward that I proposed earlier by 10 times. In exchange, I'll only request one thing."
Virgil stared into Damon's eyes and said,
"No matter what measures you use, you must prevent him from ever returning to St. Louis."
Virgil Huxley wasn't a fool, so he could naturally see the importance that the Radiance attached to Kevin. From the moment they first arrived in St. Louis until that moment, the Radiance hadn't sent a single commander other than Kevin. So as long as Kevin wasn't in St. Louis, the Radiance's members would undoubtedly become like a rudderless boat without someone to lead them. In that case, they wouldn't be able to pose much of a threat to him. With Kevin out of the way, he would only need to focus his strength to deal with the Swinton and the Thompson families.
"Rest assured, Mr. Huxley, I'll immediately arrange for my men to go to Chicago,"
Damon suddenly vowed enthusiastically. The Alliance leader frowned when he saw the letter that the Sergeant-at-Arms King had sent him.
"It seems like the major schools are in cahoots with each other. We underestimated their ability to join forces against us."
The Alliance leader slowly put down the letter and sighed as he rubbed his temples. "The Alliance's army has already suffered heavy losses at the front line, and the Sergeant-at-Arms King sent me back to ask if they should keep fighting or retreat." The messenger knelt respectfully on the ground, not daring to raise his head as he spoke.
"What is there to panic about? The Sergeant-at-Arms King has only run into a small problem. It's still far from the point where we should consider retreating."
The Alliance leader thought for a moment and continued.
"Pass along my order and tell the heads of both the administrators and the kings to come over here for a meeting."
The Alliance leader continued.
"In addition, I'll send 20,000 more reinforcements to the Sergeant-at-Arms King. Take all the medicine you need to treat all of our people's injuries with you as well."
"Yes, Alliance leader." After the messenger received the order, he respectfully lowered his head again. Only then did he dare to quickly stand up and immediately leave the room. Soon afterwards, the head of both the administrators and the kings arrived at the same time. After the two of them bowed respectfully to the Alliance leader, the head of the administrators asked at the same time,
"May we know why you have suddenly called the two of us here?"
"Now that the Sergeant-at-Arms King is in an urgent need of reinforcements at the front line, who do you think can help him lead the Alliance army to victory?"
The Alliance leader asked them directly. The heads of both the administrators and the kings frowned when they heard this question. The Sergeant-at-Arms King was one of the most powerful men in the Alliance. As a decorated combat expert, he had led the Alliance's army to countless victories over the years. If even he wasn't confident that he could win this time, then the two of them obviously couldn't think of anyone else at the moment. Suddenly, the head of the administrators came up with someone. "Alliance Master, there could be one person who could help the Sergeant-at-Arms King. How about Mr. Williams? He's one of the Alliance's messengers." Hearing this, the head of the king immediately replied, "I agree with her suggestion. Mr. Williams may be young, but he's highly regarded by your wife, the Alliance Director. Such a big and important battle like this would be the right place for him to showcase his talent." The Alliance Master frowned slightly.
Are you two talking about Kevin? Don't you think he's too inexperienced to lead our army?
You were once a young heroic fighter yourself, Alliance Leader. Moreover, Messenger already holds a high position. And if you don't allow him to train, how will he gain experience and learn? The head of the kings explained respectfully. After thinking serious for a while, the Alliance Leader sighed again.
But Kevin isn't in the Alliance's headquarters right now. It'll take some time to find him. Given that the situation at the front line is urgent, we don't have much time to look for him.
Sir, there's something you may not be aware of. Mr. Williams once saved me from the hands of those evil men at the Chicago branch of the Myriad, so perhaps he's still in Chicago.
The head of the administrators hesitated for a moment before she continued.
I'm willing to rush over there to inform Mr. Williams and urge him to return to the Alliance's headquarters as soon as possible.
That's good news. In that case, I'll let you handle this matter.
The Alliance Master laughed and slapped the table in front of them.
Tell Kevin that I'll give him 3 days to return here.
After cooking in the kitchen for nearly an hour, Kevin brought out a sumptuous dinner for Dorothy and Lily.
"Hubby, your cooking skills have improved again,"
Lily complimented as she tasted the delicious meal.
"It seems that's all you can do. If a man like you can't even cook, then there's no point in you continuing to exist in this world."
Dorothy didn't give him any praise at all as she shoveled the food he'd prepared into her mouth.
"Mom, come on. Kevin's cooking is really amazing,"
Lily told her with some annoyance.
"Don't pick on his faults all day long." "I'm not picking on his faults. I'm simply pushing him to do more for his own good."
Dorothy glanced at Kevin sternly.
"If you don't put some pressure on him, he'll never accomplish anything as a CEO."
"What Mom said is very reasonable." Kevin smiled awkwardly as he served the two of them more of the meal. After dinner, Lily followed Kevin outside for a walk.